or if you were to sell it today and what you owe. That equity means, I've got an asset, my house, that's worth $300,000 more than I owe on it. You take that information down to the bank and you say, look, I've got this asset, my house, that is worth $300,000 to me, because that's the difference between what it's worth today and what I owe on it. And the bank says, oh, that's sweet, let me lend you some money. And so the bank lends you $50,000, $75,000, $100,000. You sign a bunch of papers that say if you don't pay that loan back, the house is going to take your house. The bank is going to take your house. That's called a home equity loan or a home equity line of credit. So it's not the initial mortgage. It's not the $200,000 that you still owe from when you borrowed when you initially bought the house. It's I've owned this house for 3, 5, 7, 10, 12, 15, 35 years. And you go down to the bank and you say, it's worth a lot more than I owe on it. Won't you please lend me some money? The bank says, sure. And you say, and by the way, if I don't pay you back, you, the bank, own my house. You can foreclose. So home equity loan rates, those are influenced by the federal funds rate, and lots of other interest rates are influenced by this federal funds rate as well. So if we look at the historical pattern of interest rates, you can see that these interest rates move together. That when one interest rate goes up, the other one goes up. When one goes down, the other goes down. These three different interest rates here, the top one is home mortgage rates. It's what people pay to borrow a house. The middle one is the 10-year treasury rate. It's what the United States government pays when it borrows for a 10-year period. So when the term of their loan is 10 years. And the bottom one is 3 months treasuries. It's what the U.S. government pays if it borrows for a term of 3 months. So it's going to pay it back in 3 months. Ladies, third row from the back. Do you all have a question? Okay. Raise your hand. Let me know if you do. Thank you much. All right. So you can see that these interest rates tend to move together, that we don't have one going up and the other going down. They tend to go up and down together. What's really important for understanding the determinants of aggregate demand tend to be the long-term interest rates. So by term, we're talking about how many years do you have to pay back this loan. A 10-year term means that you have 10 years from the time you borrow to finish paying back the loan. A 3-month term means you have 3 months from the time you borrow to finish paying back the loan. A 30-year term means you have 30 years from the day you borrow to finish paying back the loan. Long-term interest rates tend to be 10, 20, or 30 years. So short term is 1 year or less, long term is 10 years or more, and the stuff in the middle is in the middle. So short term is 1 year or less, long term is 10 years or more, and then there's stuff in the middle that doesn't have a name. The Federal Reserve policy directly affects the short-term rates. They directly affect the rate paid on excess reserves. That impacts the overnight rate, which is the federal funds rate, and the federal funds rate impacts the treasury bill rate, the amount that the government pays to borrow for 30, 90, or 360 days. Those are short-term rates. But the interest rates that are relevant to investment spending are long-term rates. The interest rates that are relevant to, say, car loans are that sort of medium term, right? So if you borrow to buy a car, you're probably going to borrow on a 5-year term. Typically, maybe 7. I wouldn't do 7. Try for 3. But anyway, it's going to be a little bit longer than a year. So the connection between these short-term and long-term rates matters. We saw that they tend to move together. That was in the chart of data that I showed you. There's a concept called the yield curve, and the yield curve is a one-day snapshot that shows you on any given day what's the different interest rates that are paid for different terms, 30 days, 1 year, 10 years, 30 years. What are the different interest rates that are paid for different terms of loans? So when we do this, we put interest rates on the vertical axis and the term down here on the horizontal axis. The horizontal axis is never drawn to scale, so it'll start with 30-day, and it'll probably have 60-day, 90-day. It has 1 year, it'll have 10-year, it'll have 30-year. But it's not drawn to scale, so it's not like an inch equals 30 days and then that times a whole lot equals 30 years. You sort of smash all that stuff onto one thing. A typical yield curve is upward sloping. So here's a typical yield curve. There's construction going on backstage. What happened was last week, just before the midterm, there's a toilet backstage, there's a bathroom backstage, and the toilet flooded and completely flooded there's a carpet back there, and it's called the green room. It's where you prepare before you come out on stage. And it flooded the green room, and so there was an inch of water on the carpet in the green room back there, which is why you may have noticed that today and Monday I came straight here and unpacked out here. I didn't unpack backstage for those of you who are here right at 12 o'clock. Oh my God, it stinks backstage. Oh, it's nasty. Because you think about, a toilet overflowed and then there was a flood that's like an inch thick on a carpet back there, and oh, it's nasty. So that's what they're doing, I hope, is they're back there pulling that carpet out, because oh my God, it's disgusting. Anyway, back to where I was, the yield curve. So a typical yield curve has higher interest rates for the long term than for the short term. If a bank is going to loan to you over a 30-year period, there's an awful lot of room in that 30-year relationship for a lot of moral hazard problems. And so they charge you more to borrow long term than they charge you to borrow short term. So if you're going to borrow over 30 days, yeah, there's some changes, there's some moral hazard risk in that 30-day loan, nothing near as big as the moral hazard risk in a 30-year relationship. Just think about relationships. And so the interest rate on long-term loans tends to be higher than the interest rate on short-term loans. Let me see if this is going to work. Yeah, okay, cool. So this is a link. You can follow the link yourself. I'm going to click it and start it in just a second. And this is going to show you over here on the left is a yield curve. So see how I see it's not to scale. So here's 3-month rates, here's 2 year, here's 10 year, here's 20 year, and here's 30 year. So it's not like 1 inch equals the same number of months, but it sort of spreads along. So this is for right now, and it's showing you that right now the 3-month rate is 0.01%. So the federal government can borrow over a 3-month term right now and pay 0.01% to do so. The 20-year rate is up there it looks like it's about 2.5. The long-term rates are higher than the short-term rates. What's cool about this is that I can animate this curve, and you're going to see what happens over time. And you'll see how these interest rates move together. So let me click animate and see what happens. Okay, so it's starting. I got the years down here. I'll read them off to you. So right now we're in 1999. In 1999, even short-term rates were quite high. The yield curve was kind of flat. There's not a lot of difference between long-term and short-term rates. Now we're in the year 2000. There's a recession in 2001. The part on the right is showing you the stock market. So there's a recession that starts in 2001. Here's the summer of 2000. That's what they call an inverted yield curve when the short-term rates are above the long-term rates. It's weird. You're going to see it doesn't happen very often. Here comes the recession. It's going to start here right after September 11th in 2001. And those short-term rates, the Fed's cutting the short-term rates, bringing the short-term rates down. Notice the long-term rates not moving very much. So the yield curve's actually getting steeper. So they're cutting the short-term rates, which is what the Fed can do. They can influence the short-term rates. But those long-term rates are still determined by the banks that are trying to decide whether to lend or not. Now we're in 2003. Kind of moderate times, not great times. Stock market crash. There's a lot of bad stuff going on. The short-term rates are still pretty low. The long-term rates really not moving very much at all. That yield curve's getting steeper and steeper. Now in 2004, I'm going to let it just roll. 2005, the economy is doing pretty well, actually astoundingly well, because the housing market was going crazy. And so the Fed starts increasing interest rates because they're more worried about inflation than they are about unemployment. Notice how it's getting flatter. And now see there's a really flat, slightly inverted yield curve. So now here we are at 2006. The crisis, remember, starts in the fall of 2007. And there's actually some problems I'll tell you about next week that start in the summer of 2007, I think. I forget. August 2008. It doesn't matter. There we have flat. And here comes the crisis. There's the fall of 2007. The Fed's going to start. There's January 2008. The Fed's lowering short-term rates. The whole yield curve shifting down somewhat. Those long-term rates are still pretty high. Here we are in August, September 2008. And there it goes down to 0. and the short-term rate's down basically at 0. The long-term rates have come down as well, but the yield curve is still relatively steep. The short-term rate is now down basically as far as it can go. It can't go any lower than that. But the long-term rate is what matters to aggregate demand, and as long as that long-term rate stays up, it's not going to be spurring a whole lot of investment spending. Here we are in 2011. We're going to get some efforts on the part of the Fed to lower the long-term rate by mucking around in some of those markets. Talk about some of the details of that next week. And there you can start to see the long-term rate starts to come down. The long-term rate starts to come down, and we're anchored pretty much down here at 0 on the short-term end. And should I keep it going? Let me pause. It's going to continue pretty much like that through the end. So the link is in the link's in the slide. You can play with it yourself. It's kind of cool. It's one of those weird things that economists look at and enjoy. All right, clicker question. When the Fed decreases short-term interest rates, do long-term interest rates decrease too? A, B, C, D, or E. Always, usually, rarely, never, or what is she doing? 3 seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003, and stop. I would say, with the perspective of perhaps more history, I would say that I didn't fix my pen. Let's go back. There. I would say usually, although I suppose from having watched that, that rarely, which is the answer that many of you gave, is just as good. Certainly always is wrong and never is wrong. So the Fed would like to see those long-term rates come down when they lower the short-term rates, but that certainly was not part of the fighting, the crisis that began in 2007. The other piece that we saw there was those short-term rates hit 0. The short-term rates hitting 0 is called the zero lower bound. Interest rates can't go below 0. So there's a minimum level, a minimum value that interest rates can take. The target for the federal funds rate can't go below 0. Why would a bank lend to another bank? If the interest rate was negative, it would mean that when I loan you money, I loan you $105 and you pay me back $100. You would like that. I would have no incentive to borrow, or to lend. You would have an incentive to borrow. I would have no incentive to lend. And so the minimum for an interest rate is 0%, because there's no incentive for lenders to lend if the interest rate is anything below 0. So once the Fed's target for the federal funds rate hit basically 0, what they did was they announced it as the range of 0 to 0.25%. We say that the interest rate, the federal funds target, is at the 0 lower bound. It can't go below 0. What you'll see in the problem set is the economic conditions dictated that it should go below 0. Economic conditions were so bad, it would have been nice to have a negative interest rate, but a negative interest rate makes no sense. Nobody's going to lend at a negative interest rate. 0 is the effective minimum for interest rates. And so what the Fed did, once they hit the 0 lower bound in December of 2008, was the Fed tried other strategies. So you've heard the phrase quantitative easing. Quantitative easing was that, and there were several, there was QE 1, 2, and 3. Quantitative easing was the Fed's attempt to still influence the amount of lending in the economy through strategies, am I on strategies now? Tactic strategies, through strategies other than the federal funds rate. So they got the target for the federal funds rate down to 0. There still wasn't enough economic activity to pull the economy out of the recession that began in December 2007. And so the Fed tried quantitative easing. Quantitative easing was direct increases in excess reserves, because the belief was that if they gave banks additional excess reserves, the banks would turn around and lend those excess reserves to the public, to you, to me, and most importantly to businesses, and that would spur investment spending. Instead, we saw the graph on Monday. The quantitative easing certainly increased the amount of excess reserves in the banking system, but the banks have just been holding on to those excess reserves. So the chart I showed you on Monday where the excess reserves have soared to $3 trillion, we see that the quantitative easing, in one sense, was successful, in the sense that they vastly increased the amount of excess reserves in the banking system. In another sense, it was profoundly unsuccessful in the sense that the banks have held on to those excess reserves instead of turning around and lending them to businesses, which is what we wanted to see in order to increase investment spending, in order to kick off multiplier effects, in order to increase GDP, in order to increase employment, in order to bring the unemployment rate down much more quickly than we saw it come down. Quantitative easing. Okay, and I said all this. All right. What does all this have to do with inflation? All this has to do with inflation because, 7 minutes, because as I mentioned the other day, there is this relationship between unemployment, between output and inflation, and it's actually started as a discussion about a relationship between unemployment and inflation. Bill Phillips was a New Zealander. A New Zealander, AW, now known as Bill Phillips, who was working as a professor in the UK in the 1960s, looked at data for the United Kingdom from 1861 to 1957, and what he found was that there seemed to be a pretty stable trade-off between unemployment and wage inflation. That when he looked at the annual data, where he'd pull up and he'd say for 1861, what was the unemployment rate, and what was the rate at which wages, the amount we pay workers, what was the rate at which wages were rising. Try that one 3 times after a glass of wine at dinner tomorrow. All right, so he looked at the relationship between the unemployment rate and the rate at which wages were rising. Did this each year and found a stable relationship. And so he took the data from, as it says here, 1861 to 1913, used econometric methods and fitted a curve to that data. So the curve there is the one that best fits the data for 1861 to 1913. And then he looked at the data from 1913 to 1957 and found that those data also lay right around that curve. And so he said, look, there's a pretty stable trade-off between unemployment and wage inflation. The story that he told about why there is this relationship was a story that has to do with bargaining powers, the bargains that go on between workers and bosses. And the idea is this. Let me see which one I can start. Suppose that I'm a boss and you all are workers. So I'm a boss and you all are workers. And suppose that everybody in the room, except the GSIs, has a job. Right? So we have a really low unemployment rate. Everybody has a job, except for these 12 people over here. I'm an employer and I need to hire additional workers and I need more than 12 workers. So I could hire them, but I need more than 12 workers. And so I need to get some of you to quit the job you have and come work for me. What do I need to offer you in order to entice you to quit your job? Higher wages, that's right. So if there's a really low unemployment rate, in order for me to hire additional workers, I'm going to have to increase wages. I'm going to have to start paying more. That means that you guys have a lot of power in that bargain between workers and employers over wages. So when there's a really low unemployment rate, here we are on the left end of the horizontal axis, there's going to be a really high rate of wage inflation. Wages are going to rise really fast. On the other hand, suppose that everybody in the middle section is unemployed. You all are unemployed. The people on the edges work for me, so you all work for me. Okay. And lots of people are unemployed. First of all, if I need additional workers, do I have to offer you a really high salary to get you to come work for me? No, because your alternative is you're unemployed. So if there's a lot of unemployment, I don't have to offer you a very high wage in order to have you come work for me. Moreover, suppose I don't need any more workers. But suppose some of these folks who are already working for me, they get in their mind, they're going to come to me and say, I would like a raise. They walk in, they say, boss, I want a 10% here we go again. 10% wage increase. I'm going to say, ha, that's right, that's exactly what I'm going to say. Ha. Do you know how many people are standing outside this gate wanting your job? You think I'm going to pay you 10% more when there are people standing right over here who want your job and are probably just as good at it as you are? I'm not giving you any 10% wage increase, raise, because there's a lot of people here who are unemployed. When there are high levels of unemployment, wages rise slowly. And if there's really high unemployment, if there's really, really high unemployment, like you all are unemployed and they're all unemployed, then I have enough power to go to my workers and say, sorry, I'm going to cut your wages by 10%. If there's lots of unemployment, I can do that. Because what are you going to say? You can't do that. I quit. You quit your job. You know where you are? You're over there with all the unemployed people. And so when there's really, really high unemployment, I even have enough bargaining power that I could cut wages. So high unemployment leads to either really low wage increases or, in the worst case scenario, leads to wage cuts. This is a relationship between wages and unemployment. In the United States, we were interested not in the relationship between wages and between wages and unemployment, but between unemployment and prices. Well, it doesn't take long to go from wages to prices. Because if there are really rapid increases in wages, since labor is like 2/3 of the total cost of production, a really fast increase in what we're paying to workers is going to lead to a really fast increase in the prices that we charge for goods. Take your supply and demand curve, shift your supply curve up because of higher input costs. It's going to get passed on in the form of higher prices for output. So really rapid increases in wages are going to lead to really rapid increases in prices. Very slow increases in wages or even wage cuts are going to lead to really slow increases in prices or even price cuts. And so that story just goes from bargaining power to wages to prices, nice and smoothly like this. This is the graph that's from the original article where the Phillips curve was presented for the U.S. What I like about this is what it says at the bottom. It says, this shows the menu of choice between different degrees of unemployment and price stability as roughly estimated from the last 25 years of American data. The thought at the time, I need my 20 seconds. The thought at the time was that you could go in, if you were on the Council of Economic Advisors, and in fact they did, you go into the president, you put this chart up on the board, and you say, Mr. President, choose a point on this graph. And we will use our fiscal and monetary policy tools to move the economy to that point on the graph. It's the menu of choice. Except that if we look at the actual data from 1958 to 2014, it's pretty hard to find a stable menu. If there was really a menu of choice, all of those points would be lying around one common line. Y'all have a great Thanksgiving. Travel safely. Family's happy to see you. Try to be nice. See you on Monday.